The man who changed the locks on my door walked through mine at 8:52 on a Tuesday. He wore a borrowed gray suit that no longer fit his shoulders. He carried a thin folder and a resume printed at a public library. The receptionist offered him water in a paper cup, and he thanked her twice. 20 years had thinned his hair and softened his voice. He did not look up at the name etched into the glass behind the front desk. I watched him from the mezzanine, one floor above, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. My assistant asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. My name is Nora Vance, and I own the company he came to beg a job from. He had an interview at 9, requisition 4471, kitchen lead, store number 6. His application had crossed my desk the week before, and I had recognized the handwriting on the cover letter before I read the name. Some things the body remembers before the mind agrees. I set the coffee down. I did not feel triumph. I felt the strange, level calm of a woman who has waited 2 decades for a door to open on her side of the room. He thought he was here for a job. He had no idea whose house this was. Welcome to her silent triumph. Get comfortable. Every woman in these stories was underestimated by someone who should have known better. Hit that like button and tell me where you're watching from. I'm Nora Vance, 51 years old, and I run a hospitality group with 11 restaurants across Ohio. People know the sign, the copper spoon, long before they know me, and that is exactly how I built it. But 20 years ago, I had no company, no house, and no name of my own. I had his last name, a lease I hadn't signed, and a baby coming in the spring. To understand why I stayed so calm on that Tuesday morning, you have to go back to the woman I was before the locks were changed. So let me take you there.
Before I was anyone's boss, I was a line cook at a supper club on High Street, working doubles for $12 an hour and the promise of a sauté station. Grant Holleran managed a car dealership 2 blocks over. He was charming in the way that fills a room and empties a savings account. We married in the spring of my 28th year, in a courthouse with 2 witnesses and a lunch afterward at the diner where we met. I paid for most of what we built. When we bought the little house on Reinhardt Avenue, the down payment was $22,000. 18 of it came from me, my savings, and the small inheritance my father left when he died the winter before. Grant's name went on the deed beside mine, because that is what wives did, and I did not think to argue. I want you to hear that clearly. 18,000 of the 22 was mine. I have the cashier's check stub to this day. For 3 years, that house was the whole of my ambition. I painted the nursery a pale green before we had a reason to. I planted tomatoes along the fence. I kept a recipe box on the counter, my father's handwriting on half the cars. And I told myself that a woman who could feed people would never truly be poor. I was 30 when I got pregnant. I remember the exact morning, a Thursday in October. The test on the edge of the bathroom sink. Grant still asleep. I brought him coffee and told him he was going to be a father. He smiled and said all the right words. But something had already changed in him that I was too hopeful to read. The late nights. The phone turned face down. The way he stopped asking about my day and started asking about my hours. When I'd be going and for how long. I thought he was nervous about the baby. I thought we were tired, the way new parents to be are tired. I thought the hardest thing coming for us was a sleepless year
and a tight budget.
I had a good life, a small one, built mostly with my own 2 hands. I did not know I was standing in a house that someone was already planning to lock me out of. It happened on a Tuesday in February. I was 5 months along. I had a prenatal appointment at 11, then a shift at 4. Grant said he'd be at the dealership all day. He kissed my forehead in the kitchen and told me to drive safe. I have replayed that kiss 1,000 times, looking for the lie in it. I never found one. That is what frightens me most. The appointment ran long. The baby was healthy. A girl, the technician said, though we hadn't asked. I drove home in the early dark with a grainy photograph on the passenger seat, rehearsing how I'd tell him. My key didn't turn. I thought the lock was frozen. It was February. Things stuck. I tried again, jiggled it, put my shoulder to the door. Then I saw the shine of it. The brass too bright, the scratches gone. A new lock, a new deadbolt above it. I stood on my own porch and knocked on my own door. There was a note taped to the inside of the front window, facing out, so I would read it through the glass. His handwriting. It said the house was being sold, that his lawyer would be in touch, and that it would be easier for everyone if I didn't make a scene. Easier for everyone. I called him 11 times. He answered on the 12th, from somewhere with music in the background, and told me he'd met someone, that he'd been unhappy for years, that the house was in both our names, but the mortgage was in his, and his lawyer said possession was 9/10 of the law. He said I could pick up my clothes on Saturday, when he'd have someone there to supervise. Supervise. As if I were a stranger. As if the tomatoes along the fence had not come up in my hands. I asked him about the baby. His daughter, 5 months from being born. There was a pause. Then he said the thing I have never repeated to anyone until now. He said, "How do I even know it's mine?"
He knew. He knew the way you know your own reflection. He said it anyway because a cruel sentence is cheaper than a lawyer, and he was already counting his money. I spent that night in my car outside a grocery store, the ultrasound photo on the dash, my hand flat against my belly, promising a girl I hadn't met that I would build her a door no one could ever change the locks on. What followed was not a single fall. It was a staircase, and I found every step with my shins. The lawyer I could afford told me the truth I didn't want. Fighting for the house would cost more than the house was worth to me, and could take 2 years I didn't have. Grant sold it that summer. My $18,000 vanished into a settlement that, after fees, came to $9,000 and change. I was 6 months pregnant and functionally homeless. I moved in with my younger sister Dana in a 2-bedroom in Franklinton. I slept on a pull-out couch that folded me in half. I kept working the line until the week before I delivered, standing 10 hours on swollen feet, because a woman who stops moving in a kitchen stops getting shifts. Emily was born in April, 7 pounds even, screaming like she already knew the world would need convincing. For a while, Dana and I managed. Then Dana lost her own job, and the apartment with it. I had a newborn, no home of my own, and a bank balance that dipped below $40 more than once. When the county caseworker came, she was kind, and that was almost worse. Here is the part I have never said out loud. For 8 months, my daughter lived with Dana's ex-husband and his new wife
in a house with heat that stayed on and a crib that wasn't a dresser drawer. It was called a temporary kinship placement. I signed the papers in a beige room, and I did not cry until I reached the parking lot. And then I could not stop.
I visited every Saturday. I brought her a board book each week, even when it meant skipping meals. And I brought my coffee in the one thing I had carried out of that house on Reinhardt Avenue, a chipped blue ceramic mug, my father's. The handle cracked clean through and glued back crooked. It was a foolish thing to keep. It didn't even hold heat well. But it was the last object in my life that had belonged to a version of me who had a home. I drank from it in the parking lot after every visit, both hands wrapped around it, telling myself that 8 months was not forever. I was 31 years old, sleeping in a shelter 3 nights a week, holding a broken mug and a photograph of a daughter I was allowed to see once a week. That was the bottom. The only mercy of the bottom is that you finally know which way is up. People imagine a comeback as a single bright morning. Mine was 8 years of Tuesdays. I got Emily back in the winter she turned 1. The judge read my visitation record every Saturday without a single miss, and something in the beige room finally tilted my way. I walked out with my daughter on my hip and $11 in my pocket. I needed a plan that didn't depend on anyone's permission. So I stopped waiting for the right shift and started cooking for the shifts nobody wanted. I began with catering out of a commissary kitchen I rented by the hour, from 4 to 6 in the morning, before the paying tenants arrived. I made box lunches for construction crews, $12 a head, 40 heads, hauled in the trunk of a car with a check engine light I ignored for 2 years. If you've been listening for a while, do me one quick favor. Subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything. Here's the thing about feeding working people. They remember. A foreman who liked my short ribs told a site manager, who told a developer, who asked if I could do 100 lunches. I said yes before I knew how. Then I figured out how, at 4 in the morning, with Emily asleep in a playpen beside the walk-in. By the time she started kindergarten, I had a lease on a 900 square foot storefront on the west side. I called it the Copper Spoon, after the color of the pans my father left me. I painted the walls myself. I could not afford a sign, so for the first year, the name was just a stencil on the window. I want to be honest about the cost of those years, because the internet loves a rise and skips the arithmetic. I missed school plays. I missed the tooth fairy more than once and covered it the next morning with a clumsy lie and a folded dollar. I developed an ulcer at 36 and worked through it. I learned to do payroll at midnight and prep at 5. There were months I paid my cooks before I paid myself, and months I didn't pay myself at all. Somewhere in the 3rd year, I did something I still can't fully explain. I took the chipped blue mug off my desk, wrapped it in a dish towel, and put it in a box in the back of my closet. I told myself it was because the office was for the new life, not the old wound. The truth is that I had started to succeed, and the mug reminded me of the parking lot, and I was not ready to look at both at once. So I put it away. I did not throw it out. I never could. What I did not know in those grinding years was what was happening to Grant. I did not follow him. I did not have the time or the stomach. But a city is smaller than it pretends, and news drifts. The woman he left me for left him inside 3 years. The dealership he managed changed hands, and he did not survive the change. He tried a franchise that folded. He co-signed something he shouldn't have. By the time Emily was 10, The man who had told a lawyer that possession was 9/10 of the law possessed almost nothing. I felt no joy in it. I was too busy. And I had made a quiet decision, somewhere between the second location and the third, that I would not spend 1 hour of my one life arranging his punishment. The world was doing that on its own schedule, without my help. I just kept cooking. 2 locations, then 4, then a central kitchen, a real office, a payroll of 60 people who called me boss. By the time Emily was 15, she was rolling silverware in my flagship on Saturdays and correcting my spreadsheets by Sunday. She had my father's hands and none of my fear. When she asked about her father, I told her the truth in the smallest true pieces she could carry at each age. I never once told her he'd said, "How do I know it's mine?" Some sentences a daughter should never have to hold. We opened a 5th location the year she got her driver's license. A local paper ran a photo of the 2 of us behind the pass, and the headline called me an overnight success. I laughed for a full minute. There is no such thing. There is only the length of a night nobody photographs. By the time I was 50, the Copper Spoon was 11 restaurants and a catering arm, all under a company I built and named after myself, Vance Hospitality Group. I had taken my own name back the day the divorce was final, and I had spent 20 years making it mean something.
I ran hiring differently than most. In this industry, kitchens chew through people, and everyone in the back of the house has a story with a locked door in it somewhere. So I built a program. We called it Second Line, that hired people coming out of hard places, people with gaps on their resume, people with records, people a chain restaurant would toss in the first stack. I read the final approval on every second line hire myself. Not the first screen. My managers did that. But the last signature. I had promised a girl in a parked car once that I would build doors nobody could change the locks on. This was how I kept it. I was the one who decided who got to walk through. I did not know it yet, but I had spent 2 decades quietly becoming the exact kind of person my ex-husband would one day need and could not avoid. Here is how the mechanism actually worked, because the specifics matter. Every applicant to Vance Hospitality went through the same portal. Store managers screened and interviewed. For second-line candidates, or any candidate flagged for a lead role, the file routed to my desk for final sign-off. Resume, interview notes, references, and a 1-page cover letter we required from everyone. Handwritten, no exceptions. I read the handwriting before I read the name. I always had. It's a habit from 20 years of reading recipe cards. Requisition 4471 came to me on a Wednesday in September. Kitchen lead, store number 6, the Dublin location. The manager, a good woman named Priya, had flagged it second line and written, "Strong technically, humble, needs a shot. Recommend approval pending your review." I opened the cover letter first, the way I always do. I knew the handwriting on the second line.
20 years is a long time. It changes a face, a voice, a body. It does not change the way a man crosses his sevens. Grant always drew a little bar through the stem, a habit he'd picked up doing inventory at the dealership. And there it was, in blue ink, on a page asking me for a job. I read the whole letter before I let myself feel anything. He did not mention a wife. There wasn't one anymore. He wrote that he was 58, that he'd made mistakes he couldn't undo, that he'd been cooking in group home kitchens and a county facility for 6 years and had found, late, that he was good at it. He wrote that he'd heard the copper spoon gave people second chances. He did not know he was writing to the woman he'd left in a parked car. He signed it, respectfully, Grant Halloran. I set the letter down and sat very still. I did not call my lawyer. I did not call Priya. I did nothing at all that day. I went home and I stood in my own kitchen, in my own house, with a door whose locks I had chosen. And I made a decision I would need the next 2 weeks to understand. I decided I would not recuse myself. I would read his file like any other. I would let the truth of the man on the page, not the man from the porch, decide what I did next. And I scheduled the interview for the following Tuesday at 9 in my building on my floor. The 2 weeks before that interview were the strangest of my life. I did not investigate him the way you might think. I didn't hire anyone. I simply read what an employer is allowed to read, and I let my managers do their jobs. But a picture assembled itself anyway, and it was not the picture of the man who had taped a note to my window.
Priya's interview notes described someone quiet and exact. He showed up 40 minutes early. He bussed a table on his way in without being asked. When she asked about the 6-year gap before the group home kitchens, he didn't dress it up. He said he'd lost a marriage and a business and most of a decade to his own choices, and that cooking was the first honest work that had ever asked nothing of him but attention. I recognized the arithmetic of a life that had finally run out of shortcuts. I learned, in pieces, the shape of his fall. The woman he left me for was gone within 3 years. The dealership let him go. He'd sunk his half of my house, my $18,000, into a sandwich franchise that closed in 14 months. He co-signed a loan for a friend who defaulted. There'd been a DUI, a suspended license, a stretch of couch surfing that ended in a county work release program with a kitchen. He was, at 58, applying for a job that paid $19 an hour, and he needed it badly. I felt a great many things. I will not pretend triumph was absent entirely. I am human. But triumph, it turns out, is a thin and papery feeling. It does not hold heat like a cracked mug. What I felt underneath it was steadier and stranger. I felt free. Because here is what 20 years had taught me. The day he changed those locks, he took my house, my savings, and 8 months with my newborn daughter. Those things are gone. I have never gotten a single one of them back. Not the money, not the plays I missed, not the Saturdays in the beige visitation room. There is no version of this story where he hands them back to me across a desk. I never wanted revenge. I wanted my life back. So I stopped waiting, and I went to work. And somewhere in those 2 weeks, I understood exactly what I was going to do.
I was not going to reject him to feel powerful. Rejecting him would have been easy, and it would have made me smaller, and it would have tied me to that porch for another 20 years. I was not going to confront him either. No speech, no reveal designed to watch him flinch. I had promised a girl in a parked car a door, not a trap. I was going to read his file honestly. And if the cook was as good as Priya said, if the references held, if the man on the page had genuinely done the work,
I was going to approve him. Not to humiliate him. To be at last completely free of him. The kindest thing I could do would also be the heaviest thing he would ever carry. And I understood that. And I did it anyway. And I want you to sit with the difference. Mercy is not weakness. Sometimes mercy is the last door you get to hold. On Monday night, I told Emily her father had applied for a job at Store 6. She is 20 now, and quick. And she went very quiet. Then she asked what I was going to do. I told her. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "I don't know if I could." I said, "You won't have to. That's the whole point of the last 20 years. Tuesday came. At 8:52, he walked through my door. He interviewed with Priya first, downstairs, at 9. I did not sit in. I trusted her. And I wanted the process to be exactly what it would have been for anyone. She brought me the file at 10:40 with a single word written across the top. Yes. Technically, that should have been the end of my involvement. Final approvals I usually signed without a meeting. But for lead roles, I sometimes met the candidate. A 5-minute handshake, a welcome, a look in the eye. Priya asked if I wanted to skip it, given the volume that day. I said no. I would do for him exactly what I did for everyone. Not more, not less.
That morning, before any of it, I had done one private thing. I had taken the chipped blue mug out of the box where it had lived for years, unwrapped the dish towel, and set it on the shelf behind my desk, at eye level, beside a photo of Emily at her high school graduation. I did not put it there for him. I put it there for me. Because if I was going to do this cleanly, I wanted the whole truth of my life in the room, the parking lot and the corner office both, and I was finally ready to look at both at once. At 11:15, my assistant showed him in. He didn't recognize me at first. That is the part people don't believe, but it's true. 20 years, a different name on the door, a woman in a tailored blazer behind a desk the size of a dinner table. His eyes went to my title before they went to my face. He said, "Miss Vance, thank you for seeing me." He had a good handshake. His hands were a cook's hands now, scarred and sure. I asked him to sit. I asked him about the group home kitchen, about the dish he was proudest of, about how he handled a Saturday rush with 2 cooks down. He answered well. He answered like a man who had learned, late and expensively, to tell the truth. Not once did I say anything but what I'd say to any candidate. And then I watched his eyes drift, the way anyone's do, around the office. Past the awards, past the photo of Emily, and stop. On the mug. I saw it happen in real time. The small crease between his brows, the way a person looks at a thing that shouldn't exist in this room. A cracked blue mug, the handle glued back crooked, on the shelf of a woman who could buy 10,000 new ones. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he looked at the photo beside it, a young woman with his jaw and my father's hands. Then he looked at me, really looked this time. I watched 20 years arrive on his face all at once. He didn't speak. His mouth opened and nothing came. His hand, resting on his knee, began to tremble, and he pressed it flat to stop it. I have thought many times about what he understood in that silence. That the woman he told, "How do I know it's mine?" had built the very door he'd come to beg through.
that the daughter he denied was smiling in a frame beside a mug he'd once drunk his morning coffee from, in a kitchen he'd changed the locks on. That his last, best chance at honest work sat in the gift of the person he'd wronged most in the world. Here is where you expect the speech. There was none. I did not say I knew him. I did not say his name like a verdict. I did not smile. There was nothing in me that wanted to. I did the only thing that was both true and mine to do. I looked at his file. The cook was good. The references held. The man on the page had done the work. So I signed it. I turned requisition 4471 around on the desk so he could see it. And I said, "Priya recommends you, and I agree. The job is yours. You start Monday at store 6. Orientation is at 8. Welcome to the Copper Spoon. $19 an hour. From the woman whose $18,000 he had turned into a note taped to a window. If you want a number to hold the whole thing, hold that one. $18,000 and 20 years. And it came back to him as a $19 an hour kindness he could not refuse and could not survive with his pride intact. He sat there with the offer in front of him and began, silently, to cry. He said finally, "Nora," just my name. A question and an apology and a confession, all in 2 syllables. I did not make him say the rest. That would have been a kind of cruelty, and I was done being anywhere near cruelty. I stood, which meant the meeting was over, and I offered my hand across the desk, the same hand I'd have offered anyone. "It's Miss Vance here," I said, not coldly, just true. "We'll see you Monday."
He shook my hand. He took the offer. He walked out past the reception desk, where he'd once been handed water in a paper cup. An employee now of the company his abandoned wife had built out of the wreckage he left her in. I sat back down. I turned the cracked mug a 1/4 inch on the shelf until the crooked handle faced the wall. Then I went back to work, because Store 9 had a plumbing problem, and the world does not stop for reckonings. He started on Monday. He was, by every account, an excellent hire. That is the part I did not expect and cannot tidy up for you. Grant Halloran turned out to be exactly what Priya said. Humble, early, precise. He trained the young cooks with patience. He never mentioned me. He never asked Emily's name, though he must have known. He worked the line at Store 6 for the better part of a year, and the store's numbers went up. And I approved his raise to $21 when it came across my desk, because he'd earned it, and because I had promised myself I would keep being fair, even when fairness felt like a wound. People ask if it healed me. It did not. That is the thing no one tells you about the calm reckoning. It is not a cure. It is only the end of waiting. Here is what it cost me, and what I never got back.
Emily met him once. She chose to, not me. She drove to Store 6 on a slow Tuesday, ordered coffee at the counter, and looked at her father for the first time in her life across a register. She did not tell him who she was. She told me about it that night, at my kitchen table. And then she cried in a way I had not seen since she was small. And there was nothing I could build, no door I could install, that would fix it. 20 years of protecting her could not spare her that 1 hour. That is the cost.
Not the money. The money was always going to be gone. The cost was watching my daughter grieve a father she'd only just decided to meet, and knowing that no verdict of mine could hand her back the years he chose not to be there. I would make the same choice again. But I want to be honest that mercy has a price, and I paid it. And I am still paying it in the quiet way you pay for things that cannot be refunded. Grant left the company a little over a year later. He didn't cause trouble. He simply gave 2 weeks' notice, thanked Priya, and moved to be near a sister in Dayton. On his last day, he left an envelope with the manager, addressed to me. Inside was no letter, just a check for $18,000. Dated, signed, and I checked. Good. I have not cashed it. I don't think I ever will. Some debts, once you no longer need them paid, are worth more left open. The mug is still on my shelf. I turned the handle back around. I keep it there now on purpose, not as a trophy. Trophies are for people who won something, and this was never a game I wanted to be playing. I keep it because it is the truest thing I own. It reminds me of the parking lot, and the beige room, and the girl I promised a door to. And it reminds me that I kept that promise with my own 2 scarred hands.
If you are standing on a porch right now, knocking on a door that used to be yours, I want you to hear this. Do not spend your one life arranging someone else's punishment. Build, cook, or teach, or sell, or heal, whatever your 2 hands know how to do, and build so steadily that one day the person who locked you out will need a door, and will look up, and will find your name on it. Then be fair. Be so fair it frees you. That is the only revenge that ever leaves you lighter than it found you. Emily runs 2 of my stores now. She signs her own name, my father's name, on every hire. And when a file comes across her desk from someone with a locked door in their history, she reads the handwriting before she reads the name. She learned that from me. I learned it from a recipe box and a cracked blue mug. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.